I've been pretty firm in my position that I think Nuke should be removed from the competitive pool or taken out of the rotation once Dust 2 comes back into the pool following the E-League Major Boston, or presumably after it does that. If it follows the same pattern of last year, Valve follows the same pattern of last year, that's when it'll be put back in. And I even did my article on this topic where my basic premise was if the purpose of a map pool is to provide a variety of venues, a diversity of battlefields, then it only makes sense to remove Nuke because it's an extremely unpopular map and it's only getting less popular over time. Now, in this video, I want to sort of go in a different direction instead of just laying out my argument. I want to sort of come back at, attack the arguments that I've been seeing from other people. And now I did do a little bit of this in the article. I sort of attacked the position that pros don't play Nuke because they're lazy. And if you want to look into that, you can read the article. But there's this other problem that I'm seeing that I'm sort of been frustrated by, which is when I see people talking about this just sort of casually in comments and tweets, I think people are talking about the idea of removing Nuke in isolation. They're not really considering this substitution or these substitutions that would have to take place in your consideration. So what I'm talking about is, what I'm trying to say is that when you remove Nuke, when I'm suggesting when Nuke should be removed, it's so that Dust 2 can come back in. So when people talk about, well, you can't remove Nuke because it's going to hurt X or Y team, I don't think they take the next step and think, well, how is the map pool going to shift in total because of this change, and how is this returning map going to affect these teams that I'm saying it will hurt? So, yeah, that's an issue. And the other issue is along the same lines. They think, okay, removing Nuke's bad because it's going to hurt this team or it's going to have this effect. It's going to remove this specialty map from the pool. But you got to think about it in terms of a map has to be removed because Dust 2 is coming back in. You can't have an even numbered pool because it just doesn't make sense with the pick and ban phase and just how best of series work. You want an odd number of games played so that, you know, one team has more wins than the other end of the series, 1 game, 3 game, 5 game, etc. You can talk about more exotic solutions to the whole map pool problem, about going down to 5 maps or up to 9 maps, but just for the sake of this video, let's just talk about, for the sake of simplicity, talk about the 1-for-1 Nuke for Dust 2 trade. And yeah, going back to my point, you have to pick a map. It has to be Nuke or Cache or Overpass or Train, right? And I'm basically suggesting that Nuke is just the best option of those, which I think no one addresses. They just want to talk. People just want to talk about the negatives of removing Nuke, not talking about how removing other maps would be more negative. Okay, so let's talk about the first part, the substitution of Nuke for Dust 2. So I think a lot of people will complain, have complained about the effect of removing Nuke. That'll hurt G2, it'll hurt Mouse Sports, Astralis North, Virtus.pro, Envious, right? All right, NIP, and NIP as well. I think these are the teams most people will name. We can just go through the teams. I think it's not super simple how this change will affect these teams. It's okay. First of all, it's not simple, and then second, I think it's not as clear-cut negative for some of these teams as people like to suggest. So the biggest item to talk about is obviously G2. It's the name that always comes up when we talk about removing Nuke because they've been sort of specializing on it or having it as a specialty map more and more. I think they went 5 and 6 from the formation of the lineup to the PGL Major in terms of win-losses, 5 wins out of 6. And then they've been playing it more. It's become more prominent in their pool after the player break. Recently, they haven't been getting to play it because they haven't been playing best of 3 series, because they haven't been getting out of the playoffs, and it's really easy to get rid of Nuke in a best of 1. But yeah, anyway, G2 is a name that comes up a lot in this topic. But yeah, it's sort of weird that no one brings up the fact that it's G2 and it's Dust 2 coming back in, right? That historically, French teams are known to favor Dust 2. Well, the looser French teams that have sort of been prominent in the last few years. Now, we've never seen this exact lineup play Nuke because it was removed from the pool right as his roster was formed, so you don't have a clear 1-to-1 precedent there. But, I mean, thinking about the team in very broad terms, risk-taking, skill-based, firepower heavy, loose, this all sort of naturally lines with Dust 2. It could be a very strong map for G2, and it could be a map more popular than Nuke. So if they're equally as strong as they are, if their Dust 2 is equally as strong as their Nuke, it'll be a better map for them, because Dust 2 will presumably be played more than best of 1s and in the third game of best of 3 series, because more teams seem to agree with playing that map. It doesn't seem, most people don't have the hang-up that they have with Nuke, the hang-ups. Like, a lot of people really dislike Nuke, which is why it's not played very often. It's not a big part of many people's pool. That didn't seem to exist so much in 2016 with Dust 2. It's generally not been the case with Dust 2. So yeah, it could be, if they're equally proficient on these 2 maps, it could be a benefit for G2 to have Dust 2 in the pool, actually, which is a point I don't think anyone has brought up, or I haven't seen anyone bring up. Especially the people who want to argue for Nuke staying in the pool. Now, in the case of VP, actually going into this sort of thinking actually makes it worse for them. That, yeah, Dust 2 used to be VP's permaban, and Nuke is obviously their specialty pick. They're very, very famous for winning game after game after game on Nuke. I think they had some ridiculous, like, 20-1 record at one point of Nuke games. They lost, like, one of their very, very first games on Nuke to Gambit, I believe, in the E-League Season 1, like, main season, like, when they were having those weekend groups, which lasted forever. So in a not important game and very early on, Nuke's, the new Nuke's addition back into the pool, so it wasn't that important. So they won a lot of really important games on Nuke. It was a huge boon for them. So yeah, okay. It's going to hurt Virtus.pro, but again, talking about, well, I'll come back to this when I talk about the second part. It's about substitution and all that, with which map to remove. But okay, yeah, that actually will hurt Virtus.pro. But another team people will like to bring up is North, because North, along with NIP and VP, were sort of the triumvirate. I think Thorn sort of coined this idea. There was really 3 teams pushing the action. NIP, Dignitas, which later became North, and VP were the innovators of that map, and they sort of brought Nuke into prominence after there was an extended period in the summer where no one was playing it after it was introduced, I think, in late April, early May 2016. So that was sort of the peak of Nuke's play rate in that period, in that early 2016, not early 2016, post-player break, uncertainty era 2016 period. But anyway, yeah, so people like to think of North as being a Nuke team, but they haven't been playing it very much in recent memory. In the last 100 days, they've only played it twice, and they're 1-1 on that map. So, I mean, even in terms of win rate, and then they don't even seem to want to move to it. They don't try to be a specialist and pick it in a best of 1, best of 3 is their first pick, like Astralis was doing in mid 2017, actually doing that sometimes and surprising teams who were not good Nuke teams and actually winning pretty consistently as Astralis' first pick. But North really isn't doing that anymore. They used to do it back when they were Dignitas. They did it less. They played it less as North, and they're really playing it a lot less since the player break. So I don't think it's really. I mean, historically, you think of them as a Nuke team, but they really haven't been moving towards it recently. And then talking about Astralis, another team who's only 1-1 on it. They only played it twice in the last 100 days. Astralis, again, did play it more in the middle of 2017. And it's actually probably an adaptation. They started practicing more because in every best of three series, they were playing versus VP. Remember, they played those 2 in a row at the E-League Major and then at the DreamHack. It was the finals of the E-League Major and the semifinals of the DreamHack Masters Las Vegas tournament, where they had to play VP on Nuke in that second game of the best of 3, and they lost pretty convincingly both times. And they actually, when they play VP again for Cash for Clash E-League again, they lost that game as well. But yeah, no. So that's what sort of led them to play it more, and then they started playing it more, even picking a best of 3 first picks and winning a lot of games on it. But they're another team who's sort of fallen off on Nuke, and sort of this general trend of people playing less and less Nuke. They've only played it twice in the last 100 days. It's not a big part of their pool anymore, even though it was historically, maybe it's probably actually, like I pointed out the other day on Twitter, probably on a look part of Astralis' consistency in the middle part of 2017. But yeah, they haven't been playing Nuke. And then, you're talking about Dust 2 with, I forgot to mention Dust 2 with North. Okay, North's never been a Dignitas North. Those teams were never good Dust 2 teams. But actually, this exact Astralis lineup was a good Dust 2 team when it first formed in late October 2016. I think they had a pretty good, 8-3-ish, if I remember correctly. Record on Dust 2 is definitely a big part of their pool. I would say, as I covered in my Power Rule or Map Power Rule article, I think they're definitely in their top 3 maps in that initial dominant period of their run together. This exact Astralis team that still exists. So coming back to a Dust 2 that could be similar, this could be a map, a net positive for Astralis. It's actually not going to be a negative despite Astralis' prior success on Nuke. For North, it might be more even. Now, Envious is another team you could talk about because they're a team unlike a lot of other sort of bubble, maybe make a tournament, maybe not make a tournament, or worst team at some of the bigger tournaments, who will actually take the risk and play Nuke into better teams to try to use that wild card factor as a means of gaining wins. But the thing that I think people will haven't noticed is that Envious is actually not a successful Nuke team at all. If you look at the last, I think 11 games they played on Nuke on LAN, they've only won 1 game. So the idea that this is going to hurt Envious, it seems a little silly to me. And then again, you could talk about French teams and Dust 2, that being a possible benefit. So this is a weapon in their arsenal, this Nuke surprise pick, but it's not been a very successful pick for this Envious team at all. So yeah, that's another team. Okay, talking about Mouse Sports. So yeah, this is definitely the Nuke pick is almost if Nuke was removed, it almost certainly hurt Mouse Sports, because they are really using or abusing Nuke currently in their pool. They've played actually 9 Nuke games, which is many, I think, multiple folds, 3 folds higher than any other team. In the last 100 days, they've played it 3 times more than any other team in the top 20 or so teams that I looked at for my map rankings article. Envious was actually the second, was the team I'm thinking of with 3 plays, but all 3 of those happened to be losses. But anyway, yeah, so this is probably going to hurt Mouse Sports a bit, but okay, you can maybe throw in the caveat that Mouse Sports was actually a very good Dust 2 team back in the old lineup with Dennis and Spitty and Nico. But okay, that was like the only player that I think is still remaining from that lineup is Chris J. But okay, maybe there's some vague. Well, Chris J is a known Dust 2 player. Well, I don't know if he was especially good on Dust 2. But maybe there's some leeway there. But yeah, probably a pretty big negative for Mouse Sports in general. So, I mean, I don't think it's as clear-cut as people are saying it's going to hurt all these teams. It's not going to hurt Astralis probably. Astralis are probably going to be fine on Dust 2 if the play style is similar. They can sort of recoup their old strength. G2, again, could be lateral. Maybe tends to be negative for them because, it is a successful specialty pick for them. Envious, probably maybe a good thing they're not going to sort of... it's almost like a North and Mirage thing where Envious ruins their chances by making this pick. So that might be a net benefit for them. Mouse Sports and Virtus.pro, definitely negatives. But I think it's more nuanced than people will like to talk about. That actually, this map, the removal of this map might actually help teams who are traditionally considered to be nuke teams like Astralis and North. I guess I didn't mention NIP. NIP haven't been playing much nuke at all recently, even though they're one of the original innovators of the map. Only one play in the last 100 days, and I think it was a win over Envious. I can actually look that up right now. Was it Envious? Yes, it was Envious. So, and it's not going to hurt. You wouldn't think it hurt NIP that much as well. But the other half of the equation is which map to remove. They don't think about it in context of which map to remove. Because no matter what map you remove, it's going to hurt someone, right? If you remove Cobblestone, it's going to hurt SK. It's going to hurt Misfits. G2 was a classic map for them, but it's sort of fallen off recently. If you remove Mirage, it's going to hurt SK again. It's going to hurt FaZe. Might actually help North. But, no matter what, Overpass, Astralis, SK, FaZe, Train, Cloud9, SK, Mouse Sports. So no matter what map you remove, it's going to definitely hurt people. Now, again, when you take into account Dust 2, maybe it's not purely as problematic. And there might be some leeway. It might be some case where it actually makes it work. It's like the VP example with you're adding back in their old permanent or removing their best map. But think about it like this. So VP is obviously going to be the most hurt team from the Nuke to Dust 2 move, right? Well, Nuke aren't, not Nuke, but Virtus.pro haven't been a relevant top team for the vast majority of 2017 and moving into 2018. They had two good tournaments at the very beginning of 2017, E-League Major and DreamHack Masters Las Vegas. They did okay at the next major, made top 8. Probably should have done better if you look at their draw and everything. And that's respect how upset heavy that tournament was, with good teams like G2 and FaZe not making it into the... Oh, I guess another team you can mention is FaZe for the removal of Nuke, because they actually played Nuke a bit with the old lineup with Kiyoshima and Halu, but they haven't been playing it much at all with the new lineup, so that might be a plus negative when you think about that lineup and all the skill and Dust 2 coming back into the lineup. But so the removing Nuke, okay, it hurts teams like Virtus.pro, but they're not very relevant. Mouse Sports, okay, it's going to hurt them a lot, but they're sort of working their way into the tier 1, into the top 8. So, okay, that's going to hurt them, but it's not like it's going to hurt the most important teams in the world. The SK FaZe is clear the top 2 teams. Okay, it'll hurt G2, but again, might be more even with Dust 2 removal. So it's not, the effect it's going to have is going to only hurt these really sort of lower tier teams. or not as important teams, it's not going to have the same effect as removing something like a Mirage or Inferno, which almost everyone plays. So there's a lot fewer teams going to be hurt by this because less teams play Nuke, and then the actual teams that are hurts are not the most important teams, the most powerful teams currently in the scene. You could remove another specialty map like Overpass, but yeah, okay, that hurts a lot more teams like Overpass in comparison to Nuke. You could talk about the problems of Cobblestone and how that map, the lack of CT aggression, the difficulty of playing drop, etc., etc. But a lot of teams are very dependent on Cobblestone currently to be successful teams. Not as many teams are as dependent on Nuke. It's really... Okay, Virtus.pro is another team you could talk about as not playing a lot of Nuke recently, but that is almost exclusively because even in best of 3 series, people will first ban that against them, like FaZe did in their Epicenter match. But anyway, yeah, so Nuke will because it's played so little that the effect it can have, its removal has a less of effect than if you remove another map. Okay, so the best alternative for this would be Cache, because Cache is also not super popular, not as unpopular as Nuke, but pretty unpopular. And then it actually makes a good substitution when you think about Dust 2 and Cache and their similar identities. And I think that's the most obvious next best option is Cache for Nuke. And then you think about Cache, not that many teams really rely on it. It's really the big teams sort of playing it sometimes and getting just sort of forced to be on it by teams gambling against them and winning sometimes. Like FaZe has won, I think, 3 of the last 4, SK 4 of the last 5, or something like this. Actually, if you want to talk about VP and how this Nuke for Dust 2 move would kill VP, it's actually Cache that really helped them a lot in that Epicenter run that they had recently, where they actually won 3 games of Cache in that series. Now, again, having Nuke in the map pool helps them a lot because of the pick and ban phase issues that incurs on other teams. But I think, Cache definitely has been a bigger weapon for VP than Nuke recently, and it hurts. And then some other teams will play Cache. Some of the other better teams, Space Soldiers is a specialty Cache team, but yeah, who cares about Space Soldiers? They're like or fighting to be a top 20 team. They're not super important, right? But yeah, every other map you can think of: Cobblestone, Overpass, Mirage, Inferno, Train. Each team has more specialists than Nuke. So in that effect, it only makes sense to remove Nuke. Yes, it will hurt teams like Mouse Sports, probably VP, probably maybe G2 to some extent. I mean, it's almost probable for G2 that'll be a net negative. But the negatives would probably be greater if you go to every other map and go through sort of the plus minus team by team Dust 2 for that other map sort of calculation. So yeah, in general, I think people aren't thinking about these substitutes, and I think it's a much more tricky area. And I think the negatives aren't so extreme when you consider the alternatives.